Welcome back. In this video, we'll be talking about the essay genre of literary analysis, comparing and contrasting an analytical writing to expository and persuasive writing, and also talking about some of the specifics of what it means to compose a literary analysis. So to begin, let's recap briefly the genres of writing that we've covered so far. The first is expository, and the second would be persuasive/argumentative. So in the case of expository writing, we're referring to writing that is designed to explain or inform about a particular topic. And with persuasive and argumentative, we obviously want something that is arguing or making a case for a certain position. We specified that an expository essay, excuse me, uses examples to represent or exemplify a topic, to define the topic, and so on. A persuasive/argumentative essay uses evidence to support a position or stance on a particular topic. So expository is designed to inform, persuasive and argumentative are designed to convince or persuade the audience to adopt a new behavior or way of thinking. An analytical essay is distinct from these two, although there can be components of both in analysis. So let's define what we mean by analysis. By analysis, we mean essentially to break down something. So it is like a deconstruction, not in the theoretical sense, but in the sense of literally disassembling something and looking at its component parts to figure out how it works. So for example, one might analyze a tree and disassemble the tree, look at the different parts, those being the trunk, the canopy, the roots, etc., to figure out how the tree works, why it's built the way that it's built. And so one would determine based on observation, the roots collect water and nutrients from the soil, the canopy collects sunlight, the trunk connects both the upper and central part of the tree so that the various nutrients can then combine with the energy captured through the canopy, et cetera, to create photosynthesis and facilitate the creation of nutrients for the tree. So analysis is breaking down a thing, whatever it might be, to figure out essentially why it was created and what theory or motivation went into the assembly of the different parts. So in the case of literary analysis, we usually are analyzing literature. So what do we mean by literature? Literature, more broadly, basically refers to writing. In a very general sense, literature can refer to writing about anything. If we're talking about scientific literature related to medicine, for example, then that would include studies, it would include reports, it would include commentary on statistical data, whatever the case is. But in ELA, in this particular context, we usually think of literature as referring to fiction. This being creative writing, such as short stories, novels, poetry, and plays or drama. So, although literature very broadly, in a multidisciplinary sense, refers to writing of any kind, within the context of English language arts, we typically mean fiction. When we refer to literature, we're talking about things like novels and short stories. Okay, with this in mind, we can combine these two definitions to figure out what the literary analysis means, and then we can narrow that definition down even further. So if analysis is to break down something, and literature in the case of ELA refers to fiction, texts like short stories and novels, etc., then literary analysis becomes the breakdown of these texts. So literary analysis can be thought of simply as breaking down literature. such as novels and plays. So that seems simple enough. What would be the reason for this, though? So we understand that in an expository essay or in an informative essay, the purpose is to inform the audience. In an argumentative essay, the purpose is to persuade the audience. So what is the function of literary analysis? What exactly do we get from disassembling a piece of literature? So to do that, we need to think about some of the components that drive literary analysis. What does it mean to break down, and what do we learn from doing that? So let's consider some of the things that animate a literary text. Let's think about a novel. A novel, by its nature, is a story or narrative. We know that a narrative or story includes things like setting, characters, conflict, tone, figurative language, and so on. And so the purpose behind literary analysis is to look at these surface components and then to ask why. Why does the author introduce or set the story within a certain time or place? Why does the author include certain characters and construct those characters the way he or she does? Why does the author use certain conflicts to animate the story? Why does the author use a certain tone throughout the story? And why does the author use certain figurative language within the story in its descriptions and in its use of imagery and so on? So the ultimate question is why? Why does the author choose to construct the story, the novel, in the way that he or she does? What's the purpose behind that? What is the author trying to communicate implicitly through this construction? So the way one might look at the tree, and that's why the tree is constructed in the way it is, a literary analyst will be looking at a novel, play, poem, whatever the case is, and asking why that piece of literature is written the way that it is. Why did the author choose a sorrowful tone as opposed to a happy tone? Why did the author choose to have the main character die at the end as opposed to survive? These are basic questions, but they are at the heart of what it means to analyze a piece of literature. It is trying to decipher the ultimate rationale behind that. Why we do that is a little more complicated than the informative or argumentative essays. We can think of every piece of literature as a text. And we'll start with the bottom here. This text, which we'll discuss in more detail in a future video, is a product of an author. The author, in turn, is a product of his or her historical, geographical, and social context. So what does this mean? In brief, by analyzing a text, one can learn about the author of the text, his or her attitudes, his or her worldviews, his or her political, religious, philosophical beliefs. And by analyzing those components of the author, by analyzing the author, one can learn about the period of time, the social and political conditions, the geographic setting, etc., that gave rise to the author. So we look at the particular circumstances that birth the author, and then by looking at the author, we can figure out how the text came about. So by analyzing a text, by analyzing literature, we can reverse engineer the creation of the author, and by reverse engineering the creation of the author, we can understand in much greater detail and specificity the circumstances from which the author emerged, his or her particular context. And this teaches us something about humanity. It teaches us about the human condition. It teaches us about different worldviews, different political periods, different historical periods in human history, etc. And so it's really the ultimate way for us to develop our empathy and to gain perspective about how people have thought and viewed different phenomena and the human condition in general throughout time and across different cultures. So kind of lofty, but this is ultimately the reason why we analyze literature and study literature in ELA. This constitutes the second big umbrella as opposed to rhetoric and composition. So as we covered earlier, in ELA, we have two major umbrellas. We have rhetoric and composition, essentially the art of speaking and writing. And the second umbrella would be literary analysis, which is the study of literary texts in the interest of discovering things about the author and his or her particular context. So analysis can also be used in different contexts. It doesn't have to be only for literature. We have different forms of analysis, and we will cover those as well, such as visual analysis. But in general, literary analysis is the main mode of analysis within ELA, and this is contrasted with rhetoric and composition, which is designed to promote and teach the art of speaking and writing. Literary analysis is also distinct from informative and persuasive writing. Informative writing is designed to inform and educate about a topic. Persuasive writing is designed to persuade an audience about a topic, to take a certain stance or belief, whereas literary analysis is essentially breaking down literature in the interest of learning about an author and the circumstances that gave birth to that author. By doing that, we learn about the human condition, and we learn about how people in general have reacted to human life and various problems throughout history and across cultures. So I hope that this video has provided some clarity as to the purpose behind literary analysis and some of its minutiae. In future videos in this series, we'll also be looking at some of the components of literary analysis and how one would approach a literary analysis if he or she had to write it. Thank you, and I hope to see you soon in the next video.